What's up, everybody? So we're back on the shop with another Shop Talk Tuesday, and in this episode we are going to be working on the V-Camp knife. We got to get some holes drilled in the tang for the pins, got to get some bevels put on here to make this actually start look like a knife. So before we jump into this, I do want to talk, which I know that's crazy. Why would he talk in a Shop Talk Tuesday episode? But I'm going to talk just for a little bit at the beginning of this and kind of talk about a few things that I see in a lot of different knife makers comment sections and all that stuff, and try and clarify a few things to make it a little bit easier on people who want to get into knife making and who just wonder why we do some of the things that we do. So for one, the biggest question is, why didn't they forge that to profile? Why didn't that knife maker forge their knife to profile? Why did they do stock removal? I'm going to get into a few things. We'll talk about it whenever we actually get into them. But for one, not everybody's going to forge their knives to profile. So when it comes to the knife making processes, we do certain things for certain reasons. We will forge something to a step and then move on to the next step. We will stock removal to a step, then move on to the next step. It's all about being able to achieve a certain result, and we're going to do the particular processes to achieve those. If forging is not necessary, we're not going to forge. If stock removal is not necessary in certain things, we're not going to stock removal. It's all about being able to achieve a certain result, and we're not going to just do things for the sake of doing them for the flair of, reality TV or something. I say that, there's probably a lot of people that do that just for the sake of doing it. But for me, I'm not going to do that. So, for example, knife like this, people would ask, why didn't you forge the profile? They know I can do it because they've seen me do it in episodes. Why didn't I do it on this one? It's very simple. This particular knife already had a distal taper. The steel itself had a distal taper from the leaf spring that I reclaimed this steel from. So I didn't need to do that. All I needed to do was take this leaf spring, take the bow out of it, and then flatten out the taper so that it was nice and centered. So center the taper right there. Once that was done, the forging part was pretty much finished because I didn't need to do anything else. If I was to have forged the texture in here, not the texture, but the profile in here, and I'm going to get to the texture here in a second, that's why that was important. So forge the profile here. If I would have done that, whenever you squeeze all this steel to get to this profile, well, all the excess steel has to go somewhere, so it's either going to go this way or this way, and by doing that, I would have had to have been chasing the taper back into place the whole entire time. So forge here, 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 here. It'd have been so much extra work to maintain the taper and forging this to profile that it didn't make sense. It wasn't going to make my life easier. It would have made my life more complicated just to have it in the episode. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to make the knives the way that it makes sense, and keep it simple, stupid. Why would you make it more difficult on yourself? Why would you work harder and not smarter? We're not going to do that. So I went ahead, got everything centered and how I wanted it. So one of the other things that I did was I didn't work the steel glowing red or orange or any of that stuff, which is what you would typically suggest someone to do when they're forging 5160. You would get it nice and hot because your hammer strikes do more work whenever the steel is really hot on 5160. But on this, I was working the steel a little bit cooler than normal because I was trying to maintain the texture. So that's where the texture comes into play. So I like this pitted texture that's on here from the aging of the steel being out in the elements. I wanted to maintain that. So I worked the steel a little bit colder so that my hammer strikes didn't flatten out the texture and didn't mess up the texture with different hammer blows. So it was cool enough that I was able to maintain the complete texture and still forge it how I wanted it to. And you see how straight this is. Absolutely perfectly straight, and there is not a single bit of grinding on the sides of this. That's purely from forging. It's still that straight. So it's all about only getting it hot enough to do the thing that you need it to do. That's it. If I would have got it too hot, I would have risked doing a hammer blow and flattening out that texture. Didn't want to do that. Also, when it comes to stock removal, you're going to do stock removal at certain points to be able to achieve a certain goal. I wouldn't have forged these bevels in because I want a super deep plunge line right here. So if I would have forged them in, I would have risked not having a real deep plunge line. I want to have that deep plunge line, so we're going to grind it in. You'll see what I'm talking about in this episode because we're going to grind them in, and you'll see how awesome the plunge lines stand out because they're going to be almost that machine quality, super deep, and it's just going to be epic. So the whole point is you do the work within the steps to achieve the result, and then you move on to the next step. Finish that one, move on to the next step. Finish that one, move on to the next step. There's no need to do particular parts of knife making in excess. You don't need to do that. Achieve the result, move to the next step. Don't try and add some crazy flair that's not necessary unless you want to add the flair. If you're the person that wants to have that, do your thing. But for me, I work a full-time job and then I do knife making as a hobby for y'all on YouTube. So I'm going to work smarter, be efficient, and get things done in a timely fashion so that I can then finish filming, edit the video, and get y'all some content. So it's all about working smarter and not harder. Hopefully that helps out. I know not a lot of people can go into their episodes and talk about working steel a little bit colder than normal because you're trying to achieve a certain thing because they want to get an episode out. And if you talk about all these things, it will turn a 10-minute episode into a 2-hour episode. That's the reason why the Shop Talk Tuesdays are broken down into multiple parts so that I can break these steps down and talk about these things and hopefully help y'all out, because it's hard whenever you think, well, 5160, I have to work it hot because that's what every video on the internet has told me. If I don't work it hot, I'm doing it wrong. There's going to be times when you don't have to work it hot. There's going to be times where you put in things into motion, you learn how to do the forging process, and you start tailoring everything to what works and not what you can see in a 10-minute video. And of the 10-minute video, they only forged for 2 minutes of it. Now you're trying to get all of the knowledge they put into 2 hours worth of forging from the 2 minutes they have in their video. It's very hard. So I know this was a long intro, but hopefully y'all got a little bit of takeaways out of it. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. Guys, let's go ahead. Let's jump into the knife making portion of this episode. Get some holes drilled, get some bevels ground, and make this thing look like a knife. Let's get it. So I figured that before we drill any holes or do any bevels or anything, we'll go ahead and start with putting the jimping on the spine. This is my first time actually using this checkering file or jimping file to do this, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to be using my plunge line jig as a stop for the file. There's no file lines or anything like that on the side, so I'll be able to bump straight into this, get it nice and even, and then move to the next area and do that. So I'm just going to do it once here, once next to it, call it good. So of course I always suggest either clamping down the blade or putting a stop over here so that it doesn't helicopter on this actual pad. But got a clamp down here, we're good to go. Now we got our plunge line jig on here. So center edge marked all the way around, plunge line jig on. We're going to start by grinding the top here, so grinding the swedge where we want it to go, and then we'll grind the bevels up to the swedge. So we're going to start off with a slightly used 36 grit belt to break this edge all the way around. Now of course we'll be able to use it to do most of the grinding on the swedge, and then we're going to come down here, do a steeper, almost 45-degree angle all the way around, define that cutting edge, grind all the way to those lines that we scribed, and then we'll end up grinding the bevels up, and then at that point we'll leave it there. We'll probably go ahead and do a 120 grit and a Scotch-Brite, and then we'll leave it there for preheat treat, and then we'll work on it the rest of the way post heat treat. Alright guys, so the outro is not going to be anywhere near as long as the intro was. I know it was a really long intro, but it had good information and hopefully y'all have some takeaways from that. But without further ado, let's wrap this Shop Talk Tuesday up here with some of this awesomeness. So now that y'all got to see how the swedge looks, the bevels, how everything works together, the jimping on the spine, going up into that swedge, you know, not doing a standard Tanto tip where you have a bevel here and then another bevel going towards the tip right here. Taking that all the way through to the tip. That way we thin the tip out just a little bit with both the bevels going all the way up and the swedge. I'm really interested to know what y'all think about it now that y'all get to see it like this with the bevels and everything. One of the things that I love, weight is perfect on there. That is just awesome. Having the taper go all the way to the front, all the way to the back, just works out so well. Makes this knife super wieldable. I cannot wait to use this. Now, in the next Shop Talk Tuesday, what we're going to focus on is getting the heat treat done on this. We've got to start working on the finish. Hopefully by the end of that episode, we'll have the acid etch and stone washing done. That's the goal, at least. We'll see how it goes. Guys, thank y'all for coming by. If y'all would, give the video a thumbs up, share the video, subscribe to the channel. Y'all have an amazing day. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll catch y'all next time.